So we wanted to do this with you guys in particular. Rick and I become friends really since Abram has passed. So the way
y'all knew each other before, though.
we knew each other not super well, and talked to you a little bit at Abram's funeral. Just briefly.
That's where I got to meet your wife. That's the first time I met her.
Oh, really?
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
That's where it was.
It was where I met kind of that whole group.
You remember that all that?
I do, because I remember them talking about going to Vegas, and I was like, I want to go to Vegas.
We were going to Las Vegas?
They all went. All the girls went, apparently.
Okay.
Back in the day.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Oh, back in the day, a lot of things happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the way Rick and I have become good friends since then, and the way Rick is wired and his inquisitive nature, and I really trust you. This was a space I thought would be really helpful. Also, with the fact that you didn't go through all these details with us, I didn't want to shortchange and blow by something where you could stop us and ask questions and what that means, and because we lived it and it was just real for us, and but I could leave that and you could leave that pretty quickly without explanation.
Because we assume it, and
Right.
you actually probably have questions to ask in there, which is a gift.
And we really trust you. And then Joey, we've been friends almost 15 years to this point.
Longer than me.
Yeah.
No. Oh,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I've known Joey longer than.
But not better.
I know.
It might be iffy.
No, I promise you not.
Yeah. Anyway, I felt like both of you uniquely gifted in this space to help us kind of navigate through what was really difficult, but we trust you both in these spaces, and hopefully that comes through with the conversation and just our comfortability kind of entering these sacred spaces, that we'd rather do it with somebody we know and trust versus somebody that we don't. And
I'll add on there. I think one thing you shared with me at the beginning of, I think when God kind of gave you this vision of wanting to do this podcast, and this has really been your dream and something the Lord kind of, really gave you. One of the biggest things was, for me, it was a little bit easier on our journey to find connection with other women. And I think one of the hardest things on the cancer journey for Jack was, like, that doesn't exist. Like, that's not a thing of men. And then you had these men come alongside you. Like, these are two of the men I think that really walked the most with you. And they might not have gone through cancer, but like having men around you when you're walking through it is huge. And I think it's part of why you want to do this podcast, is like making a voice to some degree for men to easily find a space where other men speak into it. And that doesn't exist a lot. And so I think that is part of it.
yeah, for sure. There were a bunch of contact information and phone numbers pushed to me when I was in the middle of this, and I did not want to reach out to anybody.
Whereas I think I was more...
Yeah, for sure you were. But to me, it was hitting. I was like, well, what am I going to talk about? Like, yes, this sucks. Yours sucks. Yeah, mine sucks. Great.
They're referring you to people that were like going through the same
in
thing.
it or had been through it.
Yeah.
Like,
And you've said you've experienced the same thing on the opposite side of it,
Yeah.
to where
That's correct.
your number has been given and nobody reaches out, and you're like, yeah, I get it.
yeah, and I'm not mad at that at all.
Yeah.
And so that's where to have this conversation of, hey, if this is something helpful and, you know, where we can lean in and it's safe for particularly men, because I don't have that opportunity. Very little at all to speak into those places, and I'm not mad about it because I was the same way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You had that differently through Facebook, and
Yeah, there's awesome connections that I made, which was a gift. Yeah, it was different.
I'm not a social media guy.
At all.
Don't like it. However, I will say the Facebook groups that you were a part of were
Huge.
pretty, significant for us.
I think when you operate in such a small area of what the world deals with, like social media can be good and bad. But that was one of the first places I was like, I really found it being very helpful. and having people that actually got it, like even specifically, I found this group of like women who followed Jesus, who their kids had cancer. And that was like, for me, huge because it's filtered through what I believe. And I don't know, it helped.
Yeah. And for me, the last thing I wanted was a screen.
Yeah.
I needed to sit
People.
on a back porch with somebody I trusted.
And then we're in the middle of COVID. So you really couldn't do that anymore.
Right. But anyway, we just take a minute to introduce our
Co-host.
co-hosts, interviewers, however you want to
What do y'all
phrase
want to
it.
be called?
Not that.
Just by name. Yeah, just by name.
Have you said their names?
So no, Rick Hawkins and Joey Krause, who, the outlaw and the big fella.
It was so for us it was interesting. Our vantage point was we met through pickleball, right, and met through Joey, right, because you guys were kind of the ringleaders of this growing sport in our area, which was pickleball. And pickleball at the time, I know it more now. I didn't know at the time, but was a major outlet for you as a part of your kind of journey, just to go and sweat and honestly kick someone else's ass, kind
Destroy
of thing for a little
people.
bit.
He
Yeah.
literally, like, there was times Abram was at the hospital. He set up court, like, across from the hospital on the top of a roof, and they played, and Abram got to watch them.
Yeah. I remember that.
Cool. Did you come?
No.
Okay. I was
No,
like, I
no.
was
That
your
was
sister.
Tim and
we had
Victoria.
Tim, Victoria, Ty,
Yep.
Yeah.
Duke, and Gabby.
Yep.
It was
But it was a big thing.
It was like
Special.
this thing that we had just moved back, kind of thing. So we just limped in and started playing. I don't do time well, so I don't remember when all this was, but we started doing that, and I was aware of what you guys were going through, and so was Sarah, kind of thing. And kind of like what I was saying before we did this, it's like you just know your place, and it wasn't something we belonged in. It wasn't something we belonged asking about, kind of thing. And we knew that the best thing we could do was just let's just show up for pickleball, which we like doing, but it was also we knew what it meant for you when you were there, kind of thing. Which honestly meant like when you're on Jack's team, don't suck.
yeah.
He's trying to win a game out here, kind of thing. He's trying to win, like play well, And so we would do that. And then it wasn't until after, right? So I saw you guys at the funeral. That was oddly enough the first time I saw Abram. Was in the casket, and then after that, fanfare, all that whole experience, kind of thing, kind of goes right. And I remember, I think I was sitting at my house on my couch with my dog one day, and just thinking about how quiet it must feel now, several months after all of that, right? And which is human nature, and life goes on, and people go on, and then you remain the same. You stay right where you were, because time has stopped for you, and time moves forward for everybody else. At least how it feels. And so I thought, well, I'm going to reach out to this guy and just see what's up. And then we went and grabbed breakfast, and we haven't stopped doing that for however long it's been. A year, 2 years?
Yeah,
year?
Almost 2 years.
Year and a half, 2 years?
Almost 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. Every week.
Every week. Yep.
Yeah.
So anyway, grateful to both of you for being here and being who you are and trustworthy.
And your wives, too, who are behind the scenes. But
They're the best.
I love them both, too.
Yeah, they're the best. They're the best part of this.
Yeah. So I wanted to pick up where we kind of left off a little bit, and kind of categorize this section as the fight, right? So everything in diagnosis is such a whirlwind.
Yeah.
And then pretty quickly you're thrust into these places that as a parent you just shouldn't have to go, but you have to go. I mean, again, 6-year-old boy who's got his whole life ahead of you, or ahead of him, and we're in the middle of all this. So, probably the best place to pick that up is just he goes through his scan, and he lights up like a Christmas tree, and that's not a good thing. It's showing
It's the worst analogy, but it's what we heard.
Yeah,
Like it
I mean,
was.
What does that mean? I still don't understand what you mean by that.
Did you make that up, or did she?
Spots everywhere. I remember y'all saying that like crazy.
So basically, they inject.
But we heard the Christmas tree analogy.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know. It came from somewhere, but
Yeah, not uncommon for
The spots is what you mean.
correct. So
Yeah.
they inject a dye or something that's going to react with the cancer
sugar.
that will show up on the scan, so you have a real good idea of where all the cancer is. And when it hits the screen, he's pretty much head to toe. I mean, predominantly in his midsection,
It is all over
through his
face
hips,
even.
but it was in his skull, his backbone, and
legs.
his legs. And so it's, you're sitting there as a parent. I mean, you're just holding on to hope every step of the way, right? So you're thinking, okay, cancer, what are we dealing with? Are we dealing with like a tumor that we're just going to have to go, have surgery and remove it, to this is broad spectrum where he's got it everywhere and we've got to, assault these things. All, by the way, you haven't slept in 3 nights because he's in so much pain. And so you're at your wit's end. And most vulnerable. So pretty quickly, it's not good. It's not a death sentence per se, at least from the medical team, but it's not good, and the gravity is severe.
All the wonder is sapped out of it at that point. Like,
Correct.
You see exactly what it is. Yeah.
I would think even more than when we found out that he had cancer, when she came in, and I remember when she walked in, she had the screen and showed us his whole body and showed us all of the spots lit up. And she tells us it's stage 4. It was maybe worse than when, for me, in the moments that I could think of, like the worst I've ever felt, like that, like I couldn't even breathe. It was, how the hell does my son have stage 4 cancer? Like
A
that,
6-year-old.
yeah, like this shouldn't be a thing. And so the gravity of it was, yeah.
I remember that time. Can you talk about, and if you can, it's fine. Can you talk about, like, I remember girls coming into the room,
Yeah.
like where you were at, and
I will tell you one of my favorite gifts that I think God gave. It was, Abram went down to have another scan. Like he was being put under, and I'm trying to remember why now that I say that, but he had to go down and have another scan. And this is before COVID, so people could still come, even though you were only supposed to have a certain number of people in the room. I don't know if you remember this.
Yep.
And I'm not kidding. There were probably 15 girls people that love me and literally just rushed into the room. There's nurses telling them they can't come in. Abram's not in there. Like Abram's down at a scan. And I just remember them circling around me, and I just fell down on the bed weeping, and them just hovering over me and praying over me. Yeah. And it was one of those moments where I'm just like you can't make it through that without being surrounded. And I was surrounded, and it was a gift. It was people like all of our home group. And then, but just like, not even just that, like it was people that like my college roommate was there, like literally. And I was like floored that I couldn't even believe. And then one of our best friends that we walked with, that we don't do life with as much as we would like, but because they live far, but like she was there, just people that I was like, I can't believe you're here. And they just took turns praying over me, and I just wept, and it was huge. Like I
remember that.
I felt so loved, and the nurses let it go.
Yeah, they did.
They did. They were like,
they
tried really hard at first. They're like, you can't do that. And they're like, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I will say, as we get more into this topic, if there's a perceived criticism of how those nurses and technicians and doctors fought for our son, from me or Ashley, like that's not what we're after. Like
at all.
They really, that group at Children's really loved our son, and we're so if Abram's oncologist was here, if his nurse practitioner was here, if it's any of the nurses, we would give him a big hug. Like
we would.
Like I don't. We'll get into this in a little bit, but I don't think the system's perfect. But any of those critiques or criticisms are not aimed at the people that advocated for our son, and they did.
The people were great.
They were awesome, and because for me, I was so Ashley took over the room, of course. So
of course,
yeah. So
Whoa.
I'm in shock a little bit, not a little bit. A lot. I'm definitely in shock. And so I go to the break room, and there was a handful of home group guys. A home group for us is community group with the church, and they had all showed up and were praying and crying, and I was scared, but I was probably more numb than anything else because I was in overload and shutdown.
Which is how you operate in that.
Yeah,
It's different.
if I get overwhelmed, it's just like I'm here, but I'm not here. It's like autopilot. But it was significant to have those men gather around and pray and support us. But it was awful. That was the most unfunctional I think I remember you
Ever.
I thought.
I couldn't breathe.
Yeah, and rightfully so.
Totally.
But I did have concern of like, oh boy, I've got to get my shit together, because she's in a place where she can't.
And I'm pretty high functioning normally, and that was
Right.
the first time, and it's not the last time, but
To that point, you had been killing it, looking up doctors. We'd switch hospitals. You led all that, and I was very grateful. But at that point where the scan showed and you were hit with that reality, you were a mess.
Yeah.
And not functioning. So I was pivoting into, okay, we have the fight of our lives on our hand, and as this boy's father, there's nothing I'm not willing to do. I'll do whatever it takes. And so that's where we arrived. Pretty quickly, we go through the scan, and we're presented with horrible options. But again, we're dealing with this poor boy who's just writhing in pain, and we're desperately seeking relief for him. So here's the initial protocol.
because neuroblastoma has a typical protocol that they do for most, and no matter where you are, like the frontline treatment's always the same. So even if we would have done a study, not done a study, like frontline would have been the same no matter what. So
What's
it's a
the
pretty
typical protocol for that?
I think it was 4 rounds of
5. I don't know.
It's 4 or 5 rounds of these different chemos that target different things. However,
It changes after that what the protocol is. That's always typical.
it does, but to say frontline is, I feel, sells it short, because one of the chemos, it's either the first or second one.
It's a third. The hearing.
No,
Oh.
that they're told that as a male, this will most likely sterilize your son.
Yeah.
And
So the first one they say that, and then the third is losing your hearing.
right. So the first one, he's not going to have the chance, most likely, to biologically reproduce. And as a parent, you're just hoping the world for your kid. And
Yeah. So we went from finding out he has cancer to we're gonna fight this, believing and you're never not gonna believe for your kid that they're gonna beat it, and then he's like the life that you envision for your kid is still crumbling regardless, and so
Yeah, you're not ready
This
to
is-
make decisions about loss in relation to stuff like that.
yeah, this is all the
Yet.
first week before you even went home.
right, so they call it triage, right, where you have to prioritize life to quality of life to, and you just go down the list. And at that point, as a parent, and I don't know that this was the wrong decision. I just say it's a horrible decision to have to make. And
I think it was the right one. It was just a horrible one.
it's a horrible one. And it's not
Yeah.
insignificant for anybody who's had to go through that, to make a call that has these forever consequences.
Because it can be made light of, I think, on the backside, especially kids that get through this. That's amazing, and you want to celebrate that, but it comes at a cost.
Yeah.
There's a cost
So you're
of
saying,
cancer.
yeah, because if we're at 70% or 60%, whatever it was, on survival rate, and you're like, well, okay,
But
that sounds pretty good, but at, to what degree is our son going to function in that? And you're telling me all these things that are going to be taken away for him to get to that percentage.
Yeah.
And this is
Is
still
that-
within like the first.
This is like
Happens fast.
so fast.
Oh,
5
before they
days.
can give it to him, like before they gave him the first chemo, they had to tell us all the risks,
So let's talk about
and it's
triage process and some of the decisions that had to be made within that limited amount of time.
So
I need to touch on a couple things, but
yeah,
talk about
Yeah.
it a little more.
again, so like once we're transferred to Children's and they do the full spectrum scan where we really know what we're dealing with, like because at that point, and rightfully so, like the medical process is to do these lower cost, lower impact scans, and it progresses to severity.
each one that comes back more. They're like, oh, we'll do the more
Right.
costly scan,
So
which
you
is
do-
a frustrating process, to be honest.
Yeah. So you're doing a CAT scan, and then it's like, well, that
CT.
that shows us a problem, but we don't really know what the problem is. So then we go to, there's something between CAT scan and MRI.
I don't know.
Okay.
It's been a minute.
There's several steps.
There's a lot of steps.
And so it's a process of elimination, which makes sense, but on the receiving end of it, it just really, really sucks. And especially when you're getting the worst possible news after
Each one.
increment, all the while your child is suffering in the background. So we finally get to the point of that, I believe it was Thursday, where we had the full scan read to us of the severity of what we're up against and what we're dealing with. So then options are presented on how to move forward, which there really weren't that many options.
No.
Um,
Well, I don't think we had any options other than the initial protocol to start. Like there was different options eventually, but like initially, like what we were going to start and what we did start that day was literally the only option that
What else
they
were you
really
supposed to
gave you.
do?
Yeah.
Right.
right. And so as a parent or a caregiver, my heart breaks for anybody who's been in that situation because it's so horrible and you don't know what to do.
There's no good option. Like
So you talked about like where she was at. I remember sitting on a bench and we didn't talk for about an hour. We just sat there.
Yeah.
Like talk about like all of that came at you really fast and a whole lot. And we talked about where Ashley, what was that like?
Yeah, so different because Ashley's doing research in the background. She's Googling up stuff, which I had a bad experience with WebMD years before.
that's a great story though. Maybe
Uh,
we should end with that at some point.
yeah, and so I was like, never again will I
Yeah.
Google anything medical
Right.
ever. Ashley's not that way, and so she, as soon as information is coming, she's Googling it, trying to figure that out. I was way more. I mean, Ashley pushed for the change in hospital, change of doctor. I was way more. Let's just go with whatever the doctor says. They know, and I wouldn't begrudge anybody for being in that position because that's where I was. I was like, they know, I don't, and that's where I was. So anytime she pushed against what the doctor was saying, it made me uneasy because I'm scared and I want something to hold on to. And this doctor is supposed to be, in my mind, this is not really what they are, but in my mind, they're the salvific, they're the way forward.
Sure.
Because they know they're the doctor. And Ashley was never that way. So it was really hard when I didn't feel great about pushing back on any of that stuff because I'm like, I just want my son to be okay. And this person who's got the degree and got the white coat is telling me this is the way forward.
Yeah.
So, okay, we'll go that way. And then I wanted something solid to hang on to. And so Ashley was questioning or pushing back. I didn't like that because I just wanted a way forward by somebody who I perceived knew, and that was really difficult to navigate.
I will say, I think that's why we're really glad when we found our oncologist that we found, like specifically because of that, because I think there's so much value in finding someone that, like who we ended up with and where we ended up at Children's, like they're human. They're ultimately right. Like they're not God and they ultimately don't have control, but she did a great job at hearing us out, and we could push back on stuff and she would hear us. Like it was I think there's so much value in that.
I agree. And so as anybody in this situation, I would advocate that you be completely comfortable with who you're dealing with.
It's huge.
And if you're not, make a decision to change, because it's critical.
That relationship is huge.
Yeah, and it's not that you're like this is the Messiah and
Well,
they've got the answers, but
it wasn't ever like we never operated where it was like everything she says was fact. Like we didn't function that way. At the same time, we're like, ultimately the Lord's gonna do what he's gonna do, but like we're gonna compare everything, we're gonna advocate, and she gave us space to do that, which was a gift in a way that I'm really glad we had, because it would have been really hard to not be able to have those conversations.
Yeah, you guys are about to go on the most difficult journey that you've gone on as people, and you were trying to source who's the right team for us to do this with, kind of thing. How did you guys go ahead?
Oh, sorry. I was just gonna say, even like when I brought it up earlier, like I just remember when they sat us down and talked to us about doing the studies. Like I remember my question to her, because she has kids, and I was like, what would you do? And she said, that's an impossible thing to answer. And I so appreciate that, because it wasn't like ever absolutely I'd do it for the research, for whatever. Like she's like, there's no way. And I hated the answer at the time, but at the same time, like that's such a great answer, because it's like she didn't just beat around the bush. Like I'm like, I wanted a straight answer. And I think that's the biggest thing for how we're both wired. And I think everyone's wired different. Like we needed someone straightforward. And she did a great job at that. And so...
What was the process of finding her? How did that all go?
Waylon was part of it.
Yeah, so...
you made a decision to change.
Yeah.
Right? So I guess one, what was that dialogue like between the two of y'all?
A lot of
then,
those.
Yeah?
Yeah, so my... Unfortunately, I had extended family experience with cancer, and my uncle Waylon in particular had, with my aunt that had passed the year before, had just
they're how we met.
Yeah, just gone through all this, and he was an advocate for us in ways that we couldn't fully appreciate, because we weren't capable of. We just haven't walked in those waters.
Yeah, he showed up day one, and we didn't know even what to ask.
Right, and
so he just sat in there and asked questions that. Right. And that was one of them, was the doctor, who's the best. I remember him sitting at Medical City and feeling so uncomfortable, and I'm so glad he did it. But like, hey, are you the best doctor for this? Like, I mean, just putting him on the spot.
Yeah. So he just said he would show up. You're talking with him.
He didn't even ask. He just showed up.
He just showed up. Yeah, and it
was great.
It was wonderful, because we're in shock. We're not functioning, and it's not a world.
This is the first week still?
This is like the first day.
Yeah.
Wow.
Within
so much.
Wow.
Once we're like, it was Monday or Tuesday when he showed up, and
it was the day we found out I had cancer that Waylon was there.
Right. And so he knew to ask questions about, hey, what trials are there? What protocols are there? If we were in a different hospital, what would they do?
Yeah. I just remember the who's the best, and I remember being like, oh, you just asked that. Like this, I felt uncomfortable, but I look back and I'm so glad he did it.
No, we weren't equipped, and I mean, it wasn't even, you just don't know what you don't know.
He had been there before, yeah.
He'd been there before.
Yeah. He knew what to ask.
He's an attorney who'd worked in the medical field, like.
Doesn't trust a damn thing.
Just make them answer the question. But these are questions we don't even know to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And so having him available, and
But he helped us find our doctor.
he did, and gave us a lot of confidence in, hey, find the best person, most equipped,
Yeah.
and pull the trigger.
So he didn't like the current setup.
He was just like, let's find you the best setup.
Literally, the one at Medical City, like, she was great. Like, the one that would have been our oncologist, but, like, she studied under the doctor we ended up at, if that makes sense. So, like, you still want the best.
So it was more of just a fit thing, and you guys went through that.
Yeah, like, it
process.
wouldn't have been, I don't think it was, like, a bad. It was
Yeah.
just,
Yeah,
you want the best.
you want
It's
the
your kid.
best, and
Yeah.
Or it's whoever, but.
and he knowingly, unknowingly to us gave us permission to find that. And like I said, we don't have a medical background.
And he knew a lot more than we did at that point.
He did. And so having that advocate to step in for us was absolutely. And then even when we got to the new place, he was still
Yeah.
asking difficult questions. Like when it came to the trial, he's like, well, if we went down to MD Anderson in Houston, would they do it the same way? All these things that we're just ignorant to.
But they're good questions
They're
to
great,
ask.
great questions.
Like, even if you don't have that person, they're good questions to ask.
Yeah. And so,
And to not feel scared to ask them.
and that's, and my shock or whatever, I did not feel okay asking those questions. It was like,
I think that's true of both of us.
it was a weird psychologically, like I'm entrusting this team to my son and his best, so I don't want to upset them to not get their best for him.
No, that makes total sense. It's one of those areas in life where it's so sacred that you just don't want to touch it because you don't want to screw anything up, kind of
Correct.
thing. And then once you go through, you realize it's not sacred at all.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah, it's very
Right.
human.
Right. So I don't know any of this at the time, but that's the way I'm processing. And so to have an advocate at that point, asking difficult
huge.
questions,
Yeah.
was such a grace for us, and we're so grateful to have had that.
Yeah.
So turning into, all right, here's our options to move forward. We're presented with this first line, which sounds a little bit benign, but the consequences of it are severe. There's sterilization, there's significant hearing loss, which
he did have, which not all of them have, but it's like 70% of kids that go through, there's a certain chemo that they give on the third round. Don't hold me to it. I think it's called cisplatin, but his hearing was reduced significantly.
yeah, and
Not
but-
where he would have been function. Long term, like he could have hearing aids and function. Like it's not a.
and
That was a forever decision. It wasn't like it was
Oh no! Like it wasn't
doing
going to come
It was
back
like,
unless
yeah.
science did something crazy. Like it was.
that's typical.
Oh, it's most kids with neuroblastoma end up with hearing aids,
Yeah.
and so he did, and it was huge help when he got the hearing aids. Like he could hear normal with the hearing aids, but it's still a hard.
it's brutal.
I remember feeling nauseous going into that treatment, knowing literally what they were pumping into my son.
Did he know that?
No.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't. He did great with the hearing aids. I remember, honestly, when he got them, the first thing he said is like, sounds like a robot. And then he ended up loving them. Like he was fine with them because he could get his iPad. Like when you would listen to it, he'd get it to his hearing aids because we did the Bluetooth ones. And he was like, this is so cool. He was great. Like that kid, the way God wired
He's
him,
great with most
could
things,
go
which
with
is why,
stuff in a way that was so much harder for me and Jack to adjust,
Yeah.
honestly. And that was such a gift. But I remember laying in there when they start pumping it into him and just in tears, just like, Lord, please. But like, and that wasn't his answer. Like his answer was no then. Like, and that was hard. You don't know that yet. Like we didn't know that until right before, like probably 2 months later. Although I had started to notice stuff. Like I was not surprised when we found out.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, so that just very quickly you're in the throes of these awful places.
long life decisions
Long-
for the
yeah,
rest of his life.
Like forever decisions because at no point are we thinking, golly, can we just make it another year? We're thinking he's going to be
Healed.
95 years old when he dies. Like this is, and I don't want to take his ability to have his own children, to lose his hearing. We don't want any of that.
But which I will say is still a good place to sit. Like I am always thankful that we always sat and hoped that was never like until the end. Like we fought for hope that the Lord was going to heal him.
Right. And then, the other part of this process is you start, you're like, well, what does the Google say on how you deal with this stuff? And, it's like, well, if you just eat 200 carrots a day, you're fine, or, whatever.
Oh yeah. There's all kinds of stuff.
Like it's overwhelming.
Yeah.
And some of it I think has actual merit. And that's what's so hard because it's like, how do you even navigate that world of like, I mean, I still remember actually, I don't even know if I've ever shared this with you. Like, I think it was my second time ever going up, maybe my first time to take Abram actually into clinic, which is what you did in between. Like we'd be admitted whenever he was in, and then we would go up to clinic. And I met this super sweet lady. And I just remember her pulling me aside being like, well, if you do this concoction of like all these drinks, like garlic, and I don't remember what all was in it, but like, she's like, this is what healed my daughter. And like, just feeling like the pressure of that, like,
Yeah.
and it's hard because it's like, I actually do think there's truth, like the way God designed stuff, like there is natural healing stuff.
Yeah.
But that is one of the most, I just remember feeling so overwhelmed of like, how do there's too much. Like if you Google stuff, like
You're looking for the source all the time kind of thing.
There's too many
what's
things.
What's the combination that's going to be the thing for
this
us?
heals, this heals, this heals. And I do think there's absolutely like, and how God designed stuff, there is natural healing in natural things that he designed. Like there's a reason for that. That makes sense. And yet it was overwhelming.
Yeah. It's
Alongside you're doing chemo, who you're told literally when we started chemo, they told us you can't do any vitamins. You can't do.
What's the reason for that?
And we would do that different.
Yeah. So like we're coming to the place where we're just scared to death for our child, and the chemo, if someone doesn't know, basically is this targeted way to obliterate your cells, and each chemo is targeted somewhere specific. Because in 2020 and 2021, still the best medicine has to offer cancer at this point is destroy everything and hope the bad doesn't come back and only the good. And it's
an awful recipe, but it is the best we have at this point.
And
I think that's going to be better.
Yeah, hopefully down the line they'll look back at us and say, man, those savages, they gave their children poison, and that's what we did. But it was the best we had to deal with. But where I want to speak in and empower parents and caregivers is, like Ashley mentioned, one of the things we were told was don't give Abram vitamin C because it could mess with
any vitamin though.
Any vitamin. Don't give him anything for fear that it will mitigate the impact the chemo is supposed to have in its destruction of everything.
And when we hear that, we took that to heart. I mean, like, sure. I'm like, I don't want to do anything to mitigate. Like, I need this chemo to get rid of it.
Yep.
And you don't know what you don't know. But we would do that so different.
Yeah. So
knowing what we know now.
So given the known tools in Western medicine at this particular time, what we found out, but it took us over a year to go through this.
About a year.
What we found out, like the way God made our bodies is pretty incredible. And if you give our bodies fuel to fight, it's amazing. Like we're going after, just pumping up the immune system, going after things that where our different things are inflamed, and just these targeted approaches.
But just to preface that, like we would still do the chemo we did. We would have done it alongside all these things.
Yeah,
like
right.
That was not like
we did not have.
I hear him saying that. Yeah,
we did not have the courage or knowledge at the time to do anything different than what the doctor was telling us.
And that would have been different.
And again, I want to be careful with my criticism here because I think the doctor and team were doing the best they could with it. However, what I would say is the doctor and the Western medicine approach has, this much room to work. And for anybody listening, I got my hands about 6 inches apart. As an advocate and caregiver, you have
a lot more.
You have way more at your disposal. Now that's scary because
you have to make decisions.
You have to make decisions and you don't know. However,
the pressure's on you. That's what it is, though. Like
right.
it takes it off of them and it's on us. And it ultimately always was, but it felt different.
It did. It felt different. However, just it's hard to get to that place without walking through some things. Some parents and caregivers get there much sooner. We did not. We took a while. And I would say to anybody in that situation is just to know that, because once
to know that that's available.
To know that it's available, for sure. Because
to do alongside.
To know what's available.
And that is not
to know that as an advocate you can do things for your child, your
regardless if they tell you
correct.
That you can't.
Right.
And we got scared.
We were scared. We were terrified. And
rightfully so.
And I don't.
Neither of us carry that. That's not like a weight, but it's still like one of those things that's like, there's a lot of those, like we can look back and be like, we do it different.
Sure.
We would try and build up his body through 100%. Every natural means necessary alongside.
While doing it.
Because really the only thing we saw beat back the cancer was the chemo.
Yeah.
And some
immunotherapy. Immunotherapy did a ton. Immunotherapy was the best, but
that's true. But we would not cut out any of these other. We would try and give his body as much ammunition as possible to deal with those things.
Yeah. And we say that even knowing Abram, I will say is one thing throughout all of the treatment. Abram has an intense gag reflex and hated taking all medicines, hated taking all of that. And that was always an issue. So it would have been hard. Like that is a fair, like that is hard with kids. And I say that just to make a disclaimer of like, we say that like it would be an easy thing. And the truth is I can look back at that and it would have been insanely hard. And the only reason we could do it is, I guess it was 4 or 5 months into his treatment, he got a feeding tube. And he pretty much had one the rest of the time. And it wasn't because he had to have it the whole time. He literally chose to have it because he hated taking medicine.
Yeah.
So we gave him the choice. And hey, if you don't want to take the medicine, you can have the tube. And for him, it was better to get a tube once a month to have to do the medicines.
Yeah.
And so it made it very easy. Like eventually when we came around and started giving his body, it wasn't till, it was a year. It was when he got new spots and things took a turn in the wrong direction. And we started doing all the natural things. And we learned a lot of things we did not know. And when you really dive deep into that, there's stuff to it. And
yeah, the constrictions of Western medicine, and I'm not tinfoil hat guy, but between the legal constrictions for fear of being sued, that hems in the ability for caregivers to not operate in places that are just 100% vetted, approved through trials, all the bit.
Yeah, they won't let you do anything in Western medicine. Does not let you do anything that has not been fully studied. And that's what's so hard, because I think there's so many things God gave us that actually can be beneficial. And that's just a hard place, because it's I'm all for Western medicine. Mm-hmm. Is amazing. Like it is a gift, but at the same time, I think the two can be joined together in a way that I don't actually think we've arrived at. Like, and I would love that, because I'm like, I think there's so much benefit on both sides.
Yeah, because the hard part is knowing like these chemos, these drugs are very expensive and very profitable for these pharmaceutical companies, for these hospitals. Giving vitamin C is not. There's no patent. It's generic. And you could say that for a bunch of natural
So
supplements.
many things.
There's not a way to profit off of those things. So for a for-profit business,
Which it is essentially.
at 100% is, there's not, why would you pursue these means of, doing these trials with these natural substances that you can't make money out, that you'll never make a return off the trials on. So
It's hard.
I'm not necessarily like man behind the curtain, but there is a push toward the more expensive, the profitable, and that's the way these hospitals.
Well, it's like the people that we encountered, like they're operating in these lanes. So it's hard because it's like those people are for us. Like it was never not that. But the lane that they have to operate in is a very small lane compared to what you actually can do as a parent. And I think that is the biggest takeaway that we would say is like, we didn't realize our lane was as big as it could be.
Yeah, it's not a people issue. The people are operating within a system.
Oh, and
the
they were
system
great.
is limited, and it's limited because we've learned how to monetize wellness, right?
Yeah.
And so naturally, because there's money associated with it, the things that are going to be associated with wellness are going to be the things that make people money.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make that thing inherently bad.
No.
But in the grand kind of spectrum of being made well, it's a limited kind of thing. And so as you're navigating this process, you're beginning to experience that for the first time and starting to push on all those little walls of like,
But it took us months.
why can't we go here? Why we can't we do this?
Right.
Why can't we do that? It's like, oh, well, we're not allowed to do that kind of thing.
Right. And there's a dismissal from the standard Western medicine approach of these other things that we just were like, well, okay, we dismissed it too. And then
Which I'll also preface though, like when you say that, like we literally operate like the Lord was going to heal our son or not. Like we both, I think, believe that. Like it wasn't going to be what we did through Western medicine. It wasn't going to be through what we did through natural stuff. I think both the things are great. But just to like preface what you're saying, like I don't think we thought at any point if we do all of these natural things,
but
there was hope in them, but not, that was never the ultimate.
But as Abram's father, my job was to fight as hard as I possibly could.
So that's
for
the
him.
question I have is I hear you say that even now today is that you didn't get the fight that you wanted to have. Is that what you
Yeah.
Is that what that means?
Yeah, if I had to do the fight over, I would do it way different.
Yeah.
And I would not restrict myself to what I was being told by a system that was beholden to these things that I am not beholden to. I didn't know those things until
Later.
being in the system for
When
a
did
while.
you start to feel those wanting to push through them?
We felt it, I think, you can speak into this too, but I felt it for the first time when we were going to transplant, and I did not feel comfortable doing it because his level, like we said in the last episode, was not low enough for me to feel comfortable doing that. I remember sitting outside we had a little bench outside at the time and just talking to our oncologist, and she convinced me to do it, but I will tell you I would not again. But that was the first time I think I felt pressure from what in my heart was warring, like, hey, this probably isn't good. Like, I really didn't feel great about it. And I remember having so many conversations with Jack, I don't feel great about this. And so just deciding ultimately, like, we're going to trust our oncologist. And like, I don't know, but I don't love that. That was the first time I think I felt pressure.
And that was following the trial to go to that step.
And that's why, like, if we circle back to the trial thing, it was, I don't know that she would have even encouraged that as much if we weren't in the trial. I mean, honestly, and that's not a question I might not ever have an answer to that. But it's a hard place on this side, not because I think it ultimately would change if the Lord was going to save Abram or not, but just to wonder. I mean, that's not fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was later than Ashley in that because I was, at that time, I was like, well, if the doctor says, then
Yeah.
that's what we should do.
Yeah.
But
But
because
when Jack comes around, he's all in. We operate very different.
but that was part of the problem was
was.
it was the pandemic, and so I wasn't around.
Yeah.
I did not get to be there like Ashley, because Abram wanted his mama, and so he liked me there. He
did.
he needed his mama, and
But he needed me. It was
Yeah.
different.
so
He would have wanted both of us there, is what he
Yeah.
wanted. But if he had to pick, he wanted his mama.
yeah,
Yeah.
and
very
quickly I figured out, like, because I stayed working through the time, and because
With an amazing company who gave him the amount of grace was.
it was incredible, but for my own mental sanity, just having, I mean, I could have taken that time off and just dedicated to being dad and husband, but
But that said, like, I think you would have taken that time off if you could have been at the hospital, but you couldn't. Like, that was the difference. Like, you
Right.
would take any time off to be with Abram, but there was health, I think, for you in a routine of going to work because it's pandemic. And so to go to work and then come home to the kids. And we had amazing grandmas who stepped in and literally helped raise our children for a year and a half.
yeah. So I stayed working that time, but I did not have the availability or opportunity, because once the pandemic hit, everything shut down, and it was one person. He wanted his mama, which I'm not gonna fight my son about that.
I would have fought you for it. Like, there's no way I wasn't going to be there.
And I completely trusted Ashley with what we needed to do and how we needed to move forward. But I wasn't in the throes of the processes like she was. So we would communicate about this. Hey, this is upcoming, and I remember her very concerned. And I'm like, to me, I didn't feel like there was another option. I mean, this is what the doctor, who's supposed to know, is saying what to do, and that was, to me, that was kind of the end of it. And she had looked at other stuff online through the Facebook groups.
One of the best things I think I did was connect to a group on Facebook that also had kids with neuroblastoma, because that's such a rare thing, and Facebook can be a disaster, but it can be good too. Like, there's good places on there, and that was huge for me because they spoke into places that you're not just taking your doctor's word. You're hearing all these other stories who have actually lived it, not just this is what XYZ says, or this is, like, it was outside of the system essentially.
It's it's interesting to me. So you guys approach this whole thing very differently, and you do that for reasons, right? And so what's interesting is, like, because you're different now, but he is, you know what I mean? Like, but you had this is what they're saying, this is what we do. I don't want to veer right or left kind of thing. It just is what it is kind of thing. And you very instinctively, right from the gate, was like, there has to be more. And I'm going to go and just source the entire globe and move hell or high water kind of thing, and flip over every rock to try to find whatever. I want to know it all. If there's more to know, I want to know it kind of thing. What do you attribute that to? Like, because I don't experience you like that now, but it's interesting.
I think it was because my kid. I really do, because it's not my natural.
What made you not trust the system, even though you hadn't gone through it yet?
Because it was my kid.
You're just like, I don't trust anything. So you took it into your own hands.
I think if it was my own life, I probably would have been very different. Like,
you think so?
I think so.
Really?
I think it was Jack or anyone else. Like, if it was Jack or any of my kids, I think I'm like, I don't care what you say. I'm gonna fight you. Like, not fight you, like in a bad way, but like, I'm going to
just test.
I need to know that this is true. Like, there is something in me that just warred, and I really just think it was the mom in me, like, because that's not how I'm wired.
Because you didn't know what they were telling you was bad at that point. You just what.
And
I
don't think I ever thought what they were saying was bad.
Yeah.
It was just that.
That's not the right word, but
no, I know what you're saying, but I'm like, I have to be confident in what I'm doing.
Well, that's why I asked, because what's some of this I'm gathering, like you had the fight the whole time.
Yes, it's very different.
He feels like he didn't.
Yeah, and a lot of
and
that.
And now that's why,
COVID.
like, oh well, pickleball's good, or some Miami bums at a game, or like, hey, right, or whatever it is that you're like, you feel terrible about. now because you're like, oh God, well, why would I do that? That's terrible. And it's like, no, you're looking for the fight that you didn't get to have where she had it the whole time. That's what I want.
So I've never
very
thought about it like
interesting.
that. Now that you just said it like that.
Yeah.
Like I had the fight.
the whole time.
Have you thought about that?
I
hadn't thought about that.
A little bit, but it was
Or you guys were fighting differently, but yeah. Keep going.
yeah, and part mostly driven by fear of the best I had available to me was this medical team tell me this is the way.
Which, in knowing you, I don't know you're knowing you up until this point, I guess, like that's very much how you were wired until that point, kind of thing. Like there was
You fight for what you love.
Well,
not even just that, but like you trusted in a lot of things, you know, in the thing in front of you, in the thing that was kind of presiding over you, in the system, and
That is
whatever.
very
And I'm
true.
not saying those things are inherently bad. I'm just saying that was how you were wired, kind of thing, from your school, your education, religious framework, all of it, kind of thing, good and bad.
to that point in my life, those systems had never failed me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
you know, my mom had she had thyroid cancer, she had a couple rounds of breast cancer, she had melanoma, and came in, followed what the doctor said, and she was okay.
She's still okay.
And all
She
those
is,
things, all those things that terrified you,
Or awful.
and it
he was
came,
young, like when
and it came out okay.
Came out okay. My aunt and uncle, who passed from cancer,
on your mom's side, it was
to my mom's siblings, my mom's sister and brother, they fought with everything available, but those did not turn out okay.
it was breast cancer and it was melanoma
Yeah,
for them. And
but in both those instances, there wasn't a feeling of the medical system failed them, in the sense of
we didn't walk it.
and we weren't walking
Yeah.
that like as
Intimately.
closely. No, we weren't, and I don't want to say that we did, but I didn't feel that. So and I just to come out and say, like, if we'd gone through the trial as prescribed and Abram would have been fine, I would have been the biggest advocate for, hey, yeah, just follow what they say.
It's probably true.
Like, I know I would be that. So I don't want to be disingenuous and say that I would
Sure.
be anything different than that. Like,
Yeah.
no, trust the doctor, whatever they say.
Sure.
And so these are just hard lessons to learn when you see the cracks and the failures and the shortcomings. And it's not by ill intent, but they're the best we have, but they're not infallible.
Those doctors and nurse practitioners loved our son. I mean, I remember, I think one of the things that teared me up almost the most at Abram's funeral was them all being there.
Mm.
I mean, I literally I couldn't believe. I mean, it's the middle of we did it in the middle of a day. Like, they should all
Off the
be at
clock
work.
work.
I mean,
Yeah,
these
yeah.
people, and they loved our son.
Yeah.
And we were like, Dr. Watt, Nelson, all of it. I mean,
Yeah.
the whole, all of them. Like, they were all there. And it was just,
It was amazing.
Stacy.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, if any of them were here, I'd just give them a big hug. I'm not
Sure.
upset at them, but I didn't know what I didn't know. And if they were probably sitting across from me, we'd
Have
argue.
this conversation.
we would argue a little bit, and that's okay. But it wouldn't be from a place that I thought that they weren't doing everything they knew how to do.
Totally.
Or that they didn't love ours. Like, they loved ours.
Correct. Like, and then
Yeah.
that's not what I'm trying to communicate at all. I would just say to parents and caregivers, like, you have so much at your disposal, and I'm so sorry that you've got to figure it out on your own, like we did.
And that, I think that you're the advocate, and it's such a heavy weight. It's an impossible weight. And there's such a line of, like, operate with what you know. Because we've had so much grace for ourselves, and that, like, I cannot even comprehend walking through what we did without knowing the Lord. Because for me, I'm like, I truly believe he held Abram in his hands. And so we made the best decisions that we could each turn. And that, I stand by that. Like, we made the best decisions that we could. I would tell you we would do it different. But I still, at the end of the day, like, I don't believe if we would have done something different, it would have saved him. Without question, I wrestled with that. I mean, I've gotten to that place, but there's been wrestle with that. Even more so, not as much with that. Like that one has been easier for me. I've wrestled more with if we would have done XYZ different, would his suffering have been less? That is a harder place for me. And I still wrestle with that a little bit. But ultimately, like I do believe the Lord had Abram or didn't, but yet to know that we had all these things and to, I mean, you can never do this perfectly, but to operate in a place where you are making the decisions, you're advocating for your child, and yet to be able to not carry the weight necessarily. And I think that's an impossible thing for anyone to do, but would be the ideal place to land of like, I'm going to do everything I can within what I know and the power that I know. And I'm going to try to find everything I can, yet no one can do it perfect. And it's just not. Yeah.
You feel like you have a lot of peace for the fight. Like we fought. We had peace there.
We fought like hell.
She more so than me.
That's
Right.
probably,
That's why I asked that question, actually.
Yeah.
Why
that's
not?
very
so
true.
I don't land in the same place as Ashley. Not that I feel like if we would have done all those natural and helpful things that it would have saved our son. I'm not willing to go there, but I damn sure wanted to find out and would want to find out if I had the opportunity to.
So you wanted to, at some point, blow past that boundary, and there is none, and I want to use everything at my disposal,
Everything.
whether or not
It'll
that's what
be
they're
a-
saying or not, kind of thing. And you feel like you didn't get to do that.
I didn't get to do it.
It'll be a conversation for a different place, but that was tried like
Yeah.
towards the end, and it was rough. And that I think that's a whole different subject we'll go into at some point. But
It's fair.
that was
Yeah. And again, that the system, quote unquote, failing our son had to push me to that point where I was willing to do those things, because I did not start there.
Yeah.
But when you start to be confronted with, we don't know what else to do, there's nothing else we can do, and I'm like, well,
I'm not ready to give up.
that's my son, and fuck that.
Yeah.
Like there's not quit when it comes to him, and I'm not gonna quit. Like the Lord hadn't told me to quit on him. Like I'm supposed to do everything I can for him.
Yeah.
And just because your rules say that you don't have anything else to do, that's not my rules. But I had to be confronted with that
Yeah.
before I could move to that place.
Hope's the last thing to die, and that ended up really like it was too late in the game for you. You wish you would have started there.
Oh, 100%.
Yes.
But we didn't learn those things till late in the game.
How would you?
Yeah. I didn't know those limits.
Totally.
And
somebody could have told you that. It's so interesting.
Well, like the
'cause
person
someone-
that tried to offer me the drink. Like, I mean, like just stuff
yeah.
like, I mean,
you have to kind of, it's like someone could have told you that on the front end and be like, you know what, whatever, do this. And you probably still would have done what you would have done. You know, you're like, you know what,
and
I appreciate that, but that's not, we're not going to take that gamble at this point in time. Because that's what they're asking you to do. They're asking
It
you to
is.
gamble. And you have only been doing this for 5 days, and they have, supposedly been doing it for their whole life, kind of thing. And so it's like, golly, we're not going to gamble that. You know, we're not going to veer left on this road, kind of thing, and go to God knows where.
Yep.
At the cost of life.
yeah.
You know.
And so my hope in someone hearing this from me who's in this situation is not that you just throw the e-brake and quit chemo and do all natural stuff. But I do want to plant the seed of hopefully you can get to that place sooner than I did, of being open to exploring these other avenues that are available to you. Because
that could help alongside chemo.
correct. And it's not
Make it better.
it's not at the exclusion of chemo.
Sure.
I mean, I think
There's all kind of, because chemo is devastating, and just to agree to do it is not a good idea unless you are up against life or death, which we were. So I don't carry that, but it's not a light thing to agree to implement those these terrible, I mean, it's poison. It's just the worst poison that we've ever invented, and we're pumping it through our child's veins. However, like for our specific circumstance, I wish we would have come alongside with these other things to build him up along with the destruction that was being pumped in.
yes. I agree with
And
that.
I think maybe it wouldn't have saved him. He would have felt a whole lot
Yes.
better.
That's what I was speaking to earlier. Like, I think there's things we could have done that.
So let's go back a little bit to our story, right? Like we have our initial shock and diagnosis. We have the fanfare that occurs after that. We have the management of all that and decisions to try to set up life so that you can fight. And then we have what we're beginning to talk about, which is the fight and going through the initial implications of that, trying to feel the boundaries of all that. How that went on for what?
So
16 or 18 months?
probably 18 months.
I think it was a year before.
Yeah, but we're still
We're still in it.
fighting with
Before we got
with their tools only till about April of
Yes.
21.
Yes, that is true. So 18 months. But Abram was getting better. Like, the goal was always progression. And so, I mean, his scans each time was getting better until I remember we felt really optimistic he was going to be cancer free.
So explain that a little bit.
Okay. So we do all the frontline. We do
Frontline chemos.
We do the stem cell transplant, and then the back end you do immunotherapy. And immunotherapy is known for neuroblastoma. It's supposed to be amazing for bone cancer. So, like, when I say I wouldn't have done stem cell, if you asked me, we would have gone straight into immunotherapy as opposed to doing stem cell because that was so hard on his body. Just for context of anyone that actually has neuroblastoma, but
at the end of Frontline, he went from like a 19 to a
12,
12.
like barely went down, and then
so progress, but not the progress we're.
And
hoping
then stem cell, like, I think he went down maybe 1.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like nothing. Like, stem cell, basically, we put him through hell for almost 3 months where he's isolated with just me in the hospital for all of summer, like 3 months. I mean, like, literally, it was 2 rounds back to back. And it's me and him and grandma's. We rotated because I wanted to make sure to see the other kids. So you could have 2 caregivers. And this was one of the hardest decisions Jack and I had to make because Jack wanted to be there. But I'm like, how the heck do we do that? Like it didn't make sense. And that was really hard. And so I would alternate with one round I did one grandma and the other round I did different grandma each week. And so we did that. And then we do immunotherapy and his score starts dropping. And that was huge. I mean, I remember I think it's the only time we got good news ever throughout his whole treatment.
What's immunotherapy? What is that? How does that work?
It's so much better. And I think I have so much hope that it'll be more of what we do eventually. It was still painful. He didn't do great with it. Like, he had reactions, but like pain wise, it can be painful.
How does it interact with the body?
It's actually giving your body good stuff to fight it. So it's instead of like giving it chemo to destroy what is bad, it's literally giving your body to go after the bad.
It's like helping
It's the opposite.
your own immune system target
Those cells. It's huge.
Those problem cells.
Wow.
And so he started getting a lot better. So the lowest we ever got was a 2 on our Curry score, which obviously 0 is no cancer.
Yeah, so we're kind of going
You're
fast.
so close then.
Yeah.
We were
So close.
Frontline.
How many months in was that?
So Frontline
The 2.
treatment took us to like the end of April, and then we did stem cell transplant, and that took us through all of summer. And we did one little bit of radiation,
Oh yeah, we did do radiation in there.
targeted radiation.
Just the main part that he had his tumor removed. That's a whole nother thing.
Oh, we had surgery in there for the main tumor. That was before stem
That was
cell.
before stem cell.
And then, that was extremely successful as far as we were aware.
Yeah.
Like removing that initial mass. Move into stem cell. That takes us through the summer, do some targeted radiation, and then we move to immunotherapy. So like until we get to immunotherapy, we're having incremental success, but it's very slow. And Ashley's connected
I know enough.
to all these
It wasn't
people where like that have gone through this, where other kids that had started the same time as Abram or ahead, we're seeing way more progress than
In
we
general, with neuroblastoma, like if frontline chemo, like the kids that normally live, not all, like there's absolutely stories of like kids that do the immunotherapy, but like the stories that are the best absolutely come out of frontline. close to a 0. And then you do all the other stuff just to make sure you have every cell. Where we're going in, like, there's still a ton of cancer in his body. So trying to do all that and throw it at it, essentially what happened was I think it was about November when we had the 2. And then
So we started immunotherapy, and we're treading water, making a little bit of progress, but we're not feeling great. And then we
This is our one
we
good
do
scan.
our first scan after immunotherapy, and we're like, oh wow, like we're doing awesome. So like we're going out, we're
we
celebrating,
Yeah.
which I think you should.
You should.
What'd you guys do to celebrate?
I think we went to the grotto.
Grotto. Gotta
Don't
go
tell
to the
anyone else
grotto.
about
As a
the
family,
grotto now
just-
that we
so
just
just
said it
two
on the
y'all, just two
podcast.
y'all.
Oh, got it. There's no doubt you went to the grotto.
We
Well,
100% went to the grotto.
The other thing we did, we went down. My buddy was running a restaurant in Dallas at the time.
Oh, we could do
that's
that. That was
The
good.
Italian place.
And just it was incredible, and we were celebrating. Some of the best advice we got was
Yes, I was about to say this.
like, cause
It's all hard.
it's all hard, and it's a marathon. It's not a sprint. But when you have good news, you need to celebrate the mess out of it.
Not even just good news. Like, we would celebrate. Like, we got home from the hospital and we're like, we're going to celebrate. Specifically, like, we say we. Like, I meant me and Jack. Like, it wasn't necessarily a big thing, but like, there's so much that is taxing on your marriage when you're going through hell. Like, I mean, it was insanely hard. And so for us, those moments were precious. Like, it was like, whatever we got, like, we got home from the hospital, we completed this, we got through this, like, whatever good we could find, we chose to celebrate.
Yeah.
And it was one of the best things we did throughout, because it kept us, you have to hold the hope. You should never not.
Yeah.
And I mean, that was from Matt Chandler telling us that, because
Yeah.
when he was going through stuff, like
He
and
did.
and he told us it wasn't even that he got like great news, but if it wasn't bad news, they would celebrate. And going through
Well, we did.
his brain cancer stuff, and that was some of the most liberating. Like, you need those when you're going through it, because like all we ever have is today, but you just feel that at a different level. So that day that we had
Oh,
good news, or
that was the only good news. Everyone else was just getting through it on the other ones. That was like, we had good news.
Yeah.
And you had
Well-
to take it and run with it.
Oh, we did.
but we
Yeah.
had to,
To
and
fill your hope up. Yeah.
it was critical. Like I said, it wasn't always good news. It was just maybe not bad news. But then when we get to November and we've got our first scan where we go from like a 12 to a 2,
That's
we're like,
huge.
we're like, oh man, we're gonna
We're going to beat it. That was the first time I think we thought we were going to beat it.
beat this thing.
So initial scan came in as what? What was the number?
19.
19. And then how many months
This
to
is,
when we're celebrating at 2?
11.
yeah.
11 months and we're at 2.
But then we
so
go,
basically a year.
Yeah.
Crazy. Okay.
and this sounds crazy, but it's not. So we go December, it ended up being January 1st, didn't it? Or was December?
It's very end of December.
Right at the end of December. So it's
after,
still,
after Christmas, we're celebrating.
we're doing more immunotherapy.
Yeah, but we're thinking we're going into this next
It's
scan.
going to be a 0.
We're going to be, and they don't ever say cure.
No.
They call it NED, which is no evidence of disease.
Yeah, neuroblastoma can always technically come back, but most times, like, if you can make it 3 to 5 years, like, it doesn't. Like, that's not typical. So they say NED, but we go in and it's December and it comes back still at a 2, but it's 2 new spots. And that's what from the beginning, this is what I did love about our oncologist. She was very straightforward. She's like, obviously she always wanted more cancer to be gone, but she's like, I don't worry until there's new. And so essentially what happened is and we learned this later, we didn't learn this right away, but like, his disease had mutated. So it wasn't responding to the immunotherapy anymore. So he had 2 new spots. So we had to go a whole different direction, and you never will play catch up.
Mhm.
And it's not that you can't. Like, I've genuinely heard stories like, you can do it. Like, I have heard stories, and the Lord can do whatever he wants to
And
do.
that was after you
obviously.
celebrated.
But,
That's right. You get the 2.
yeah. And we get a 2 again.
You're at
but it's
19. You go through
new
11 months of
spots.
fighting. You landed at 2. We're moving in the right direction. And then shortly after that, you find.
The other 2 spots were gone, and then there was 2 new ones. And that's what you don't want.